Buried up to her neck for being barren, she was saved by a widowed cowboy who took her home. The sun rose over the small frontier town, painting the dusty streets with a harsh, golden light. The air was dry and heavy, carrying the faint smell of hay, horses, and the faint smoke from chimneys. In the heart of this unforgiving town lived Martha, a young woman of 22, with soft brown hair and eyes that seemed to carry both hope and sorrow. She had always been quiet and hardworking, tending to her small garden, helping neighbors with chores, and keeping her small home tidy. But the town did not see her kindness or her efforts. Instead, they saw what she could not give them: children. For many years, Martha had faced whispers behind her back. Women would shake their heads as she walked past, muttering about the misfortune of a life without children. Men would avoid talking to her, afraid to marry someone who could not bring them a family. Children who once ran and laughed around her now kept their distance. The isolation stung more than any harsh words could. Martha often wondered why life had been so cruel. She longed for a family, for a home filled with laughter and warmth, but it seemed that destiny had other plans. The town, a cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by wide plains, had its own rules. People lived by superstition, old stories, and harsh traditions. If someone failed to meet the expectations of society, the punishment was often public and humiliating. Martha had heard stories of women who were shamed for the smallest missteps, and she had hoped she would never be one of them. Yet despite her careful life, the day came when the town's judgment fell upon her. It was a morning like any other, with the sun climbing higher and the townspeople bustling about. Markets were opening, horses were being fed, and dust swirled in the streets as carts creaked along the wooden planks. Martha stepped outside to gather water from the well, her hands careful not to spill a single drop. She had noticed the strange glances of the women nearby, whispers growing louder as she walked past. Something felt different that morning. Before she could even reach the well, a crowd had formed in the center of the town. The mayor, a tall, stern man with a voice that carried authority, called out for everyone to gather. He spoke of the town's rules, of how a woman's role was to nurture life and raise children. His words, though polite in tone, were sharp in meaning. They were aimed directly at Martha. The crowd parted and all eyes turned toward her. Martha's heart pounded and a cold shiver ran down her spine. She knew what was coming, but she could not speak or defend herself. The punishment was cruel. According to an old town tradition, a woman who failed to bear children would be buried in the earth, leaving only her head above ground, as a warning to others. The townspeople had dug a shallow pit near the square, and now they guided Martha toward it. Her feet sank into the dry, hard soil, and the heat of the sun pressed against her skin. She tried to hold her head high, but shame and fear tightened around her chest like a heavy rope. As she was lowered into the pit, the earth pressed against her sides, cold and rough against her skin. She felt the dirt scrape her hands and arms as she tried to steady herself. Her heart raced, and a lump rose in her throat. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to cry. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, trying to remember the small comforts of her life. The scent of her garden, the soft hum of the wind through the trees, the gentle murmur of her mother's voice long ago. The crowd watched silently as the last shovel of dirt was shoveled in, leaving only Martha's head above the ground. The sun beat down on her, making her scalp burn, and dust filled her mouth whenever she breathed. She could hear the murmurs of the townspeople, some whispering in judgment, others shaking their heads. Martha felt completely alone, abandoned by everyone she had known. She thought of running, of fighting, but the dirt held her fast and the shame kept her silent. Minutes stretched into hours. The sun climbed higher, scorching the land and beating relentlessly against her face. Her throat grew dry and she swallowed with difficulty. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of the wooden signs above the shops, the clatter of hooves on the dirt roads, the distant cry of a child she could not reach. She longed for water, for relief, for even a friendly face, but no one stepped forward. Her body ached, her muscles cramped, and she began to feel dizzy. Yet deep inside, a small flame of hope refused to die. Martha whispered prayers under her breath, silent pleas for help that might never come. She thought of her mother, of the stories of resilience passed down through generations, and she held on to the memory of love as a lifeline. The injustice of her punishment did not make sense to her, but she could not give in to despair. She focused on her breathing, counting each inhale and exhale, trying to keep her mind from surrendering to panic. As the sun reached its peak, casting long shadows across the town square, something unusual happened. A distant sound, faint but growing louder, caught her attention. The rhythmic beat of hooves against the ground drew nearer, carrying with it the possibility of salvation. Martha's heart leapt. Could it be someone coming to save her, or was it just another illusion of hope? She forced herself to stay still, her eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of mercy. A figure emerged from the horizon, riding a sturdy horse with a calm but determined air. He was a man in his 30s, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a weathered coat, the kind of clothes worn by someone who spent long days on the prairie. His gaze was steady, and his movements deliberate, as if he had no fear of the crowd or their judgment. Martha felt a flicker of trust. There was something different about him, a sense of fairness, of strength, of quiet courage. The man stopped near the edge of the crowd and shouted, his voice clear and commanding. He demanded to know what had happened, why a woman was buried in such a cruel way. The mayor and a few of the town elders tried to respond, their voices faltering under the weight of the stranger's gaze. The man did not waver. He dismounted, approached the pit, and began to dig with his strong hands, moving the dirt away from Martha with surprising speed. Each handful of soil that fell away felt like a release from the weight of shame and fear. Martha could hardly believe it. The man, this stranger, was saving her. Relief flooded her body, but so did gratitude and curiosity. Who was he? Why did he care? She lifted her hands weakly as he pulled her out of the pit, feeling the rough earth scrape against her arms one last time. She was free. Her legs trembled as she stood, leaning on him for support, feeling a warmth and safety she had not known in years. The townspeople watched in silence, some shocked, some ashamed, others whispering among themselves. Martha did not look back. She focused on the man who had saved her, whose presence felt like a promise of something better. He handed her a water skin, which she drank greedily, savoring every drop as if it were the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. Her strength began to return, little by little, and she realized that for the first time in her life, she was not alone. The man introduced himself as Elias, a widowed cowboy who had been passing through on his way to check his ranch. He spoke gently, asking if she could walk with him, if she could trust him to take her to safety. Martha, still shaking from fear and sun, nodded. She had nothing left in that town, no home, no family, no hope. Yet somehow in this moment she felt the stirrings of trust. Elias extended a hand, and she took it, letting him guide her away from the pit, away from the cruel eyes, and toward a future that had once seemed impossible. As they left the town behind, the sun beginning to lower in the sky, Martha took a deep breath. The dust, the humiliation, and the pain were behind her, and ahead lay an unknown road with the promise of kindness, safety, and perhaps, eventually, belonging. For the first time in years, she dared to hope. Martha followed Elias down the narrow trail that led away from the town, her hands still trembling slightly from the ordeal she had endured. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting a soft, golden light across the prairie, and the wind carried a cool relief after the harsh heat of the afternoon. For the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope, though it was fragile and cautious. She glanced at Elias as he rode beside her, noting the calm strength in his movements. There was no rush, no judgment in his eyes, only quiet concern. Elias noticed her glance and offered a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to," he said gently. "We'll get somewhere safe and then you can rest." His voice was calm, steady, and strangely comforting. Martha nodded, grateful that he didn't press her for words or explanations. She felt too exhausted, too raw to tell anyone what had happened, and Elias seemed to understand that without asking. The trail led them through a patch of tall grass that swayed in the wind, hiding the narrow dirt path beneath. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and for a moment the world seemed normal, untouched by the cruelty of the town. Martha took a deep breath and let herself notice the details she had long ignored, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the gentle rustle of leaves, the faint smell of wildflowers carried by the breeze. It felt strange, almost foreign, to experience beauty without fear or judgment. As they walked, Elias kept an eye on the horizon, scanning for any signs of trouble. "The town may not like it," he said quietly, "but they can't touch you once we're on the open land. Out here, it's just us and the sky. You'll be safe." His words wrapped around her like a protective shield, and Martha felt a weight lift from her chest. She had been buried, humiliated, and left to suffer, but in this moment she realized that safety was not just a dream, it was possible. Elias guided her to a nearby clearing, where a modest ranch sat among rolling hills. A few wooden buildings with slanted roofs made up the homestead, and a small herd of cattle grazed lazily in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, promising warmth and food. Martha's eyes widened slightly. She had never been on a ranch before, only seen them from the edges of town, and the sight filled her with both curiosity and a sense of calm. This place, remote and quiet, felt like a different world, a world where she might finally belong. Elias dismounted and held out his hand to help her up onto the porch of the house. "Take your time," he said. "You've been through a lot." Martha leaned on his shoulder for a moment, letting her legs regain strength. She noticed how strong his hands were, how steady his touch, and a sense of gratitude washed over her. It was more than just relief at being rescued. It was the simple realization that someone could care for her without expecting anything in return. Inside the house, the air was cool and smelled faintly of bread and wood smoke. A small fire burned in the hearth and a kettle hung above it, steaming gently. Elias guided her to a chair near the fire. "Sit down and rest," he said. "I'll get you some water and food." Martha sank into the chair, her body aching from the long hours in the pit and the harsh sun. She let herself relax for the first time in what felt like forever, closing her eyes and listening to the gentle crackle of the fire. Elias returned with a cup of water and some bread. He handed them to her without a word, his eyes kind but unobtrusive. Martha drank the water slowly, savoring each sip as if it were the sweetest she had ever tasted. She tore the bread into small pieces, eating slowly, feeling nourishment seep into her tired body. She noticed how quiet the house was, how simple and unpretentious. There were no prying eyes, no whispers, no judgment, only warmth and the promise of care. Over the next few days, Elias helped Martha regain her strength. He showed her where to sleep, how to tend to the small chores around the house, and how to care for herself after the trauma she had endured. At first, Martha was shy and hesitant, unsure if she could trust anyone again. But Elias was patient. He never pushed her, never demanded her attention or gratitude. He simply offered support, letting her take the pace she needed. Slowly, Martha began to talk, first in small, cautious words, then in longer sentences. She told Elias about her life in the town, about the whispers and the judgment, about the shame of being buried in the earth. She spoke of her longing for a family, her sorrow at being unable to give life, and her fear that she would never be valued. Elias listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, his eyes reflecting understanding rather than pity. He did not offer empty words or promises. Instead, he let her speak, letting her pain be acknowledged simply by being heard. In return, Elias shared pieces of his own story. He spoke of his late wife, who had passed several years before, leaving him alone with his ranch and his work. He told her of the long days tending cattle, of the solitude he had grown used to, and of the loneliness that sometimes weighed heavily on him. Martha listened, realizing that behind his calm exterior was a man who had also known loss and heartache. There was a quiet strength in him, a resilience that resonated with her own struggles. As the days turned into weeks, Martha began to find comfort in the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to feed the animals, mend fences, and cook simple meals over the fire. Each task, though small, gave her a sense of purpose and accomplishment. She felt her body grow stronger, her mind clearer, and her heart lighter. For the first time in years, she experienced a sense of normalcy, a sense that life could go on beyond the cruelty she had suffered. Evenings were the hardest at first. The silence of the house reminded her of the town, of isolation and fear. But Elias made sure she was never alone. He would sit with her by the fire, sometimes talking about nothing in particular, sometimes sharing stories from his past. There were nights when they simply watched the stars together, letting the quiet of the prairie soothe their souls. Martha found herself laughing softly at his dry humor, feeling a warmth in her chest she had thought was lost forever. One afternoon, as they worked together in the garden Elias had planted, Martha paused to admire the rows of vegetables and flowers. "I never thought I'd enjoy this," she admitted, wiping sweat from her brow. "I never thought I could find peace again." Elias smiled, handing her a small trowel. "Peace isn't given," he said. "It's built day by day, and sometimes it comes from the simplest things, the earth, the sky, and the people who care enough to stand by you." Martha nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She realized that she had been buried not just in the earth, but in the weight of shame, fear, and loneliness. Elias had not only dug her out physically, but had begun to lift her spirit as well. The fear that had once controlled her life began to loosen its grip, replaced by a cautious optimism, a belief that perhaps she could belong somewhere with someone who saw her worth. The bond between them grew quietly, built on trust, patience, and shared moments. They did not rush into conversation or companionship. They allowed it to unfold naturally. Martha began to look forward to the mornings when Elias would be outside tending to the ranch, to the evenings by the fire, to the simple pleasure of knowing someone cared for her without judgment. She felt her heart opening slowly to the possibility of friendship, and perhaps, someday, something more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Martha stood on the porch and took a deep breath. She looked over the rolling hills, the quiet fields, and the small house that had become her refuge. The fear, the humiliation, and the pain of the town were far behind her, replaced by the gentle reassurance of safety and kindness. Elias joined her, handing her a cup of tea, and together they watched the stars begin to twinkle above the prairie. In that moment, Martha understood that rescue was more than just being pulled from the earth. Rescue was being seen, being heard, and being treated with respect and care. Elias had given her that gift, and she cherished it deeply. The journey ahead was still uncertain, and there would be challenges, but for the first time in her life, she felt a glimmer of hope that she could face them. The days continued, each one blending into the next with quiet routines, small victories, and moments of connection. Martha learned to trust again, to laugh again, and to imagine a future beyond the pain of her past. Elias, too, found comfort in her presence, a companion to share the solitude of the ranch and the joys of simple living. Together, they began to build a life founded on respect, care, and the unspoken understanding that they had both survived hardships that could have broken them. Martha no longer felt defined by the town or by her inability to have children. She discovered that her strength, her kindness, and her courage were what mattered most. With Elias by her side, she learned that a person's worth was not measured by what society demanded, but by the depth of their heart and the resilience of their spirit. And as the prairie stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Martha realized that being saved was not just about escaping harm. It was about finding a place where she could breathe freely, a place where she could heal, and a place where she could belong. Elias had given her that chance, and she would hold on to it with all her heart. The days at the ranch grew longer, and with each passing sunrise, Martha felt herself changing in ways she had never imagined. The quiet mornings spent tending the animals, the soft songs of birds in the fields, and the warmth of the sun on her face began to replace the shadow of fear and shame that had weighed on her for so long. She learned to milk the cows, feed the chickens, and water the garden. Each small task, though simple, gave her a sense of purpose and pride. For the first time in years, she felt useful, not just to someone, but to herself. Elias watched her with a quiet admiration, never pressing her, never demanding her gratitude. He understood that healing took time, that trust was fragile, and that Martha had been through more than anyone could imagine. Often he would work alongside her, fixing fences or checking on the cattle, speaking only when necessary. When he did talk, his words were gentle and careful, meant to teach, to encourage, or simply to keep her company. Martha appreciated his presence more than she could say, though she did not always find the words to express it. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of fence near the pasture, a sudden wind blew across the fields, carrying dust and the faint scent of wildflowers. Martha held onto the wooden post, steadying herself, while Elias adjusted a loose plank. She looked up at him and noticed the faint lines around his eyes, the way his hands moved confidently yet with care. There was a calm strength in him, a patience that seemed endless. For the first time, she felt safe not just in body, but in heart. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked quietly, not sure if she should have spoken. Elias paused, leaning against the post and looking out at the horizon. "Sometimes," he admitted. "It's quiet, and some days it feels too quiet. But then there are moments like this, working alongside someone, sharing the land, the sky, the animals, and it doesn't feel so empty anymore." He glanced at her, and Martha felt a warmth spread through her chest. His words were simple, but they carried meaning. For him, just as for her, companionship was a rare and precious thing. Evenings brought their own rhythm. Martha learned to cook meals over the fire, simple dishes of bread, stews, and vegetables from the garden. She discovered a quiet joy in preparing food, in seeing Elias enjoy what she made, and in the comfort of sharing a meal without fear or judgment. They would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, watching the flames dance and listening to the soft whistle of the wind outside. In these quiet moments, Martha felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. Her body and mind were healing, but more importantly, so was her spirit. She began to laugh again, softly at first, then with more confidence. She found herself sharing small stories from her past, of childhood memories and simple joys, of moments that made her smile despite the hardships. Elias listened with patience and interest, never interrupting, never dismissing. He offered his own stories too, tales of life on the ranch, of his travels, and of the love he had once shared with his late wife. Through these stories, a connection grew between them, a quiet understanding that they were both survivors, both shaped by loss, and both capable of hope. One day, while walking through the fields to check on a distant herd, Martha stumbled and twisted her ankle. Pain shot through her leg and she cried out, startled. Elias was immediately at her side, helping her to stand. He examined her ankle carefully, wrapping it with a clean cloth and giving her instructions on how to rest it. "You need to take it slow," he said gently. "The ground is uneven and you can't risk another injury." Martha felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. She was used to being self-reliant, but in this moment she allowed herself to lean on him, to trust that he would help her without judgment. That evening, Elias made her a small bed near the fire so she could rest comfortably. He brought her warm water to wash her feet and spoke quietly, telling her stories of the prairie, of the stars, and of the quiet miracles that could be found in everyday life. Martha listened, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion, and for the first time in weeks she slept without fear, without the memories of the pit haunting her dreams. As the weeks passed, Martha began to explore the land around the ranch more freely. She wandered through the tall grass, picking wildflowers and watching the birds build their nests. She felt a sense of freedom she had never known, a freedom that came from being away from the judgmental eyes of the town. Each day brought a new discovery, a new sense of wonder, and a new layer of healing. Elias noticed these changes and smiled quietly to himself. He had not expected such a transformation, but he saw it clearly. Martha was no longer the timid, fearful girl who had been buried in the earth. She was becoming strong, confident, and capable. He admired her resilience, her courage, and the quiet determination that had carried her through so much. Yet he also admired her softness, her kindness, and the way she treated the animals and the land with care. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Elias and Martha sat on the porch, sharing a simple meal. The fire crackled nearby, and the soft whistle of the wind carried the distant sounds of the prairie. Martha spoke of her dreams, of the things she wished she could do, and of the hope she felt for the future. Elias listened, nodding and offering gentle encouragement. "You've come a long way," he said softly. "I see it every day. You've survived so much, and yet you're still growing, still hoping. That's something not everyone can do." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. His words were not pity, but recognition of her strength, her courage, and her journey. She realized that for the first time she was being seen for who she truly was, not for what she lacked or what society expected of her. The nights grew colder as winter approached, and Martha learned to start the fire, gather wood, and keep the house warm. She found comfort in the routines, in the sense of responsibility, and in the quiet moments shared with Elias. They worked together seamlessly, without words, understanding each other through gestures, glances, and shared tasks. Martha felt a sense of belonging she had never known, a feeling that she was part of something larger than herself, a small, quiet family built not by blood, but by trust, care, and mutual respect. As winter settled in, Martha began to reflect on her past more openly. She thought of the town, of the pit, of the cruelty she had endured. Yet she no longer felt consumed by anger or shame. Instead, she felt a quiet determination to live differently, to embrace the opportunities before her, and to find joy in the simple, meaningful moments of life. Elias had shown her that life could be gentle, that kindness could exist even after cruelty, and that hope could survive even in the harshest conditions. One afternoon, while sitting by the fire and mending clothes, Martha asked Elias about his wife. "Do you ever miss her?" she asked softly. Elias paused, looking into the flames. "I do," he admitted. "But I also know that she would want me to live to find joy again, and I see that happening now with you. You've brought a new light into this place, a new hope. And I am grateful for it." Martha felt warmth spread through her chest. His words were not declarations of love, but a gentle acknowledgement of their bond, one that was growing quietly, naturally, and without rush. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them deepened. Martha found herself laughing more easily, sharing her thoughts without fear, and trusting in a future she had once believed was impossible. Elias, too, found comfort and companionship in her presence. They were no longer simply two people living on a ranch. They were partners, friends, and quiet sources of strength for each other. One evening, after a long day tending the animals and preparing firewood, Martha sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. Elias joined her, handing her a warm cup of tea. "The stars look brighter out here," he said softly. Martha nodded, feeling the truth in his words. Out here, away from judgment, cruelty, and fear, life felt full of possibility. She realized that she had survived not just because of chance, but because someone had chosen to see her worth and stand by her side. As the prairie stretched endlessly before them, Martha felt a sense of peace she had never known. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to hope, to trust, and to embrace life again. Elias had given her that gift, and she would carry it forward with all her heart. Together, they faced each day, building a quiet life of resilience, care, and gentle companionship. Martha no longer defined herself by the town's cruel judgments or her inability to bear children. She understood that her strength, her kindness, and her courage were what truly mattered. With Elias by her side, she learned that love and family could take many forms, and that belonging was found not in conformity, but in the bonds we choose and nurture. And as the cold winter nights passed and the first signs of spring appeared on the horizon, Martha realized that she had been given a second chance, not just at survival, but at life itself. Elias had rescued her from the pit, but together they had rescued each other from loneliness, fear, and the shadows of the past. And in that quiet, enduring connection, they found something rare, precious, and unbreakable: hope, trust, and the beginnings of love. Spring arrived slowly on the prairie, bringing soft rains that refreshed the fields and made the earth smell sweet and new. Martha could feel the change in the air as she stepped outside early one morning, the soft drizzle dampening her hair and clothes. She inhaled deeply, savoring the freshness, the way the wind carried the scent of wet soil and growing plants. For the first time in her life, she felt fully alive, aware that each day was a gift and that she had survived so much to reach this moment. The ranch had taken on a different life with Martha there. She moved confidently through the fields, tending the garden, feeding the animals, and caring for the house. The routines she had once learned were now second nature, and she found joy in the quiet successes of daily life. The vegetables she planted grew strong and healthy, the chickens clucked happily around the yard, and the cattle grazed peacefully under the watchful eyes of both her and Elias. It was not a grand life, but it was full, meaningful, and entirely her own. Elias watched her with a quiet pride that had grown over the months. He noticed the way her hands moved with skill and care, how her eyes sparkled when she discovered something new, and how her laughter now filled the house. He remembered the frightened, lonely woman he had found buried in the earth and marveled at the transformation. She had grown stronger, braver, and more confident, not because he had changed her, but because he had given her space, respect, and kindness. She had taken those gifts and built a life from them, one that reflected her courage and heart. One afternoon, while mending a fence at the edge of the pasture, Elias stopped and looked at Martha. "You've done well here," he said softly. "The place feels alive again because you've brought life back into it. You've brought hope back into me too." Martha paused, feeling the weight of his words. She had never thought of herself as someone who could change anything, let alone another person. But as she looked into his eyes, she realized that they had changed each other quietly, slowly, and profoundly. Martha smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "I've found a place to belong," she said, "and a place that feels like home. I never thought I could feel this way again." Elias nodded, his gaze steady and understanding. They did not need to speak more. The bond between them was already strong, built on months of shared work, trust, and quiet moments of connection. As the days continued, Martha's confidence grew in ways she had never imagined. She began to venture further from the house, exploring the surrounding fields, small creeks, and nearby woodlands. She discovered places where wildflowers bloomed in abundance, where deer and rabbits moved gracefully through the trees, and where the quiet beauty of nature reminded her of life's endless possibilities. Each discovery filled her with joy, and each day she returned to the ranch with a sense of accomplishment and wonder. Elias accompanied her on some of these walks, though often he would let her go ahead, watching from a distance with a proud smile. He understood that Martha's strength came not just from protection, but from freedom, the freedom to explore, to learn, and to grow without fear. And she embraced that freedom, feeling the weight of past cruelty lift further with every step she took in the open air. Evenings continued to bring quiet moments of reflection. Martha and Elias would sit by the fire, sharing simple meals and conversation, watching the flames flicker and listening to the gentle sounds of the prairie. Sometimes they spoke of dreams, of the life they wished to build together, and of the hopes they carried quietly in their hearts. Martha realized that she no longer feared the future, nor did she doubt her worth. She had learned to trust herself, to trust Elias, and to believe in the goodness that could exist in the world. One chilly morning, as the first signs of summer approached, Martha tended to the garden while Elias repaired the barn roof. The sun was rising, painting the sky in gentle hues of pink and orange. Martha paused to look over the fields, feeling a sense of pride in what she and Elias had created. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home filled with life, warmth, and hope. She felt the presence of safety and belonging in every corner of the land. Elias walked over and joined her, handing her a basket filled with freshly picked vegetables. "You've built something beautiful here," he said, his voice quiet but filled with admiration. "Not just the garden, not just the ranch, but a life worth living." Martha looked at him, feeling gratitude and something deeper stirring in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "You saved me, and then you gave me the chance to save myself." Elias reached out and took her hand gently, a simple gesture that carried more meaning than words ever could. Over time, their bond grew into a gentle, enduring love. It was not rushed, nor was it dramatic, but it was steady and true, built on months of trust, understanding, and shared experiences. Martha learned to laugh freely, to express herself, and to take joy in the simple moments of life. Elias learned to share his solitude, to open his heart, and to find comfort in companionship once more. Together, they discovered a rhythm to life that was both peaceful and fulfilling. Martha also began to consider the broader meaning of family and home. She realized that the traditional expectations she had once feared, marriage, children, acceptance by society, were not the only paths to a meaningful life. She had found family in Elias, in the animals, and in the land itself. She had found purpose in work, in learning, and in caring for another living being. And she had found hope that the future, while unknown, held promise and possibility. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sun set, Elias spoke quietly. "Life is unpredictable," he said, "and we cannot control what comes our way. But we can choose how we respond, how we care for each other, and how we live each day. I am glad I found you, Martha. And I am glad we can share this life together." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. She squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of his words in every heartbeat. As the seasons changed, so did their life. The ranch thrived under their care, and they became known in nearby settlements for their resilience, kindness, and quiet strength. Neighbors came to respect Martha not for her past, but for the life she had built and the courage she had shown. Elias' reputation as a capable and fair rancher grew, but he valued Martha's presence far more than recognition from others. Together, they created a small, quiet world where cruelty had no place, and where kindness and love could flourish. Martha reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the pit, the humiliation, and the fear that had once consumed her. She remembered the long days of pain and the nights when hope felt impossible. And she remembered the moment Elias had appeared, strong and kind, offering her rescue without judgment. That moment had changed everything, but it had been the months of shared life that had truly healed her. She had survived not just physically, but emotionally, and she had grown into a woman stronger, wiser, and braver than she had ever imagined. One morning, as the prairie awoke with the songs of birds and the soft rustle of grass in the breeze, Martha stood at the edge of the fields, watching the horizon. Elias approached, carrying a small bundle of firewood, and handed it to her with a gentle smile. They worked together quietly, comfortable in each other's presence, sharing the simple labor of daily life. Martha felt a deep contentment in this shared routine, a feeling that she had never experienced in the harsh town she had once called home. Later, as they rested on the porch, Martha spoke softly. "I used to think life was cruel," she said. "I used to think that I had no worth, that I was nothing. But now I see that life can be gentle, that people can be kind, and that even after the darkest moments there can be light." Elias nodded, understanding perfectly. "You've found your strength, Martha," he said. "And you've shown me that even in loneliness, life can bring unexpected joy." The days and weeks continued, each one filled with small victories, quiet laughter, and moments of shared peace. Martha and Elias built a life together that was not defined by societal expectations, but by the choices they made, the love they shared, and the respect they held for each other. Martha no longer feared the future. She faced it with courage, knowing that whatever came, she had the strength, resilience, and support to meet it. In the quiet of the prairie, surrounded by the land, animals, and the warmth of their shared home, Martha and Elias found something rare and beautiful, a life built on trust, love, and hope. Martha had been buried in the earth, judged and abandoned, but she had risen again, stronger and wiser, finding a second chance in the kindness of a man who saw her worth. Together, they looked toward the horizon, knowing that life, with all its challenges and joys, was theirs to share, and that they would face it together, side by side, heart to heart. The story of Martha and Elias ended not with grand events, but with quiet, enduring happiness. It was a life of purpose, connection, and love. A life that had been hard-won, but one that proved that even in the darkest moments, there is hope, there is kindness, and there is the possibility of new beginnings. And as the sun rose and set over the endless prairie, Martha knew that she was truly free, truly valued, and truly home.